I think I'll get started. The reason why I'm asking everyone to move forward, it's because we actually initially intended this session more as a roundtable, just to maximize engagement and discussion. So please don't hesitate to move forward. So to get started, my name is Leila Charles, and I'm an investment manager at British International Investment, also known as BII. BII is a UK development finance institution. We invest in the private sector in developing markets to support sustainability, financial inclusion, and productive economies. I will be facilitating the session today. So as you know, this is quite a special topic on securitization. Notably, we're here to speak about how securitization can help promote capital market development in Africa. To get us started, I would like to invite Chris Chijutomi on stage for opening remarks. Chris will be followed by Mary, and then we'll go straight into the presentation and panel, and we'll close with Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Leila. Well, good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of BII, which is the UK Development Finance Institution that Leila just described, I would like to firstly thank you all for your attendance and I guess your support in this very interesting discussion that is going to be held shortly. I would also like to thank our partner, FSD Africa, for their partnership on this project. Earlier this year, BII and FSD Africa commissioned a research project to do a deep dive into securitization markets in Africa. Now, we all know that this is still a very nascent market, but one with a lot of potential to help address the financing gap, which a lot of you would have heard discussed over the last couple of days, and the challenges in terms of this gap in the continent, and for it to develop and diversify local capital markets. Now, the research paper, which will be published by July, will be made available to you all, but today's event is an opportunity for us to really share some key findings to date and really have some insightful discussions just really around the subject matter and how we can really help deepen this in the context of the continent of Africa. So from my perspective, it's a pleasure to really have you all join us to engage on this very important topic. Now, during the presentation and the panel that will follow, you'll be hearing from various stakeholders that have been quite active in the securitization space as arrangers and investors, and particularly notably here in Côte d'Ivoire and the broader WAMU region. So we welcome your insights. I particularly would like to hear your questions throughout the discussion, so please do participate. As Leila earlier mentioned, this was intended to really be a round table, so we'll make the most out of it in terms of really having a two-way conversation, because I'm sure there's a lot of insights that you as audience will definitely bring to this conversation. So thank you very much, all of you, and really look forward to the conversation. Thank you. Hand it over to Mary.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for joining us. Speaking on behalf of FSD Africa, thank you for joining us as we share some insights on the finding of the study that Chris has just described, exploring the opportunities that exist in using securitizations to channel local currency funding towards real sectors of our economies. I guess you'll all agree with me that we're at a point in time where local currency mobilization has become critical to fund development and real sector outcomes on the continent. And as we may all know in this room, in many African markets, the instruments being used to channel long-term financing for development are limited. So a diversity of financing instruments is needed to solve the diverse financing challenges and attract diverse types of capital. So today we are talking about the opportunities that exist to free up balance sheets for financial institutions and other entities, which enables them to have the financial capacity to be able to do more. And that's exactly where securitizations come in. So for us as market facilitators, FSD Africa, we have a market building mandate. And that means we help institutions to access long-term capital for sustainable growth. And this always starts by understanding the lay of the land, just understanding the contextual nuances in different markets and working collaboratively with others to build the necessary building blocks for new and emerging financing instruments on our continent. And that's the basis for the work that we will be discussing today. And in this regard, we are really pleased to be undertaking this work with the BII team, and we greatly value this partnership and also appreciate Copernic and Securities, represented today by Michael, who will be making the presentation. And we recognize, of course, that today's audience may be mixed. Some may have a varied understanding of the topic, but we invite your questions, comments, and this will really be useful in enabling us to move this work forward. So thank you very much for making time today.
Thank you. A round of applause for Mary and Chris. I'd like to welcome Michael Brank. He's a consultant who's been actually working on this project with us. He's representing Copernican. Michael has over 20 years of experience in the securitization space, so we're very grateful to actually have him with us today to share the work that he's been doing.
Thank you, Leila. I hope I don't upset the arrangers. I'm going to tilt my lectern at 45 degrees. I hope that's okay. So this is the role of securitization in promoting capital markets development in Africa. I'll go to the first slide. Thank you. As indicated, this presentation outlines the work my colleagues and I have undertaken analysing the role of securitization, promoting capital markets development in Africa, with a focus ex-South Africa, but we have used South Africa as a benchmark. The absence of regulatory framework is often seen as a main impediment to securitization, and we were quite interested in testing this assertion in this study. The absence of appropriate, in the presentation we aim to summarise our findings in relation to mapping existing markets and explore the key impediments in each of these markets and more generally across Africa. We also propose considering a few focus markets that offer the most likely potential to improve securitization issuance by financial institutions, and also making some actionable recommendations with the potential to improve financial institution issuance activity in the identified focus markets. Next slide. So for the study, we found it helpful to be clear on what is included in the term securitization, as the term is often used to include a broad array of transactions that normally wouldn't meet the definition of securitization. As a result, we've taken a relatively purist approach to consider only true sale or direct origination for our definition, but at the same time recognising that the path to increased development of the securitization market is likely to include stepping stones to pure securitization transactions, such as covered bonds, infrastructure bonds, and revenue bonds. Deliberately, we have not included synthetics, which do not involve sale of assets and involve higher risk and complexity. Exceptions are the sovereign MDBs and DFI issuers. We do acknowledge the important role that MDBs and DFI issuers play via investment and participation in building market capacity and demonstration deals, but it is worth noting that these issuers typically do not face many of the impediments faced by other issuers. It's also worth noting the question of data collection, which is a recurring issue and comes up in later slides concerning the difficulty of mapping the African securitization market and comparing performance and returns. Next slide, please. So, understanding the benefits that can be derived by the key securitization stakeholders was important in the market mapping study. For issuers, this was less focused on capital relief than might be expected and included important benefits of further funding diversification and access to a different investor base. Being able to access longer funding terms, particularly in the case of fixed rate fundings, overall better asset and liability matching, improved risk management, being better able to manage single risk exposures and sector exposures, reduction of event risk exposures such as geographic concentrations. And finally, in some but not all instances, a primary driver or benefit is a potential lower cost of funding, usually because of the obligor credit rating being better than the issuers, or the risk profile of the underlying asset pool being superior to the issuer's risk profile. For investors, the benefits are it creates an opportunity to invest in different asset classes they would not normally have access to. It offers liquidity, which is an important investor benefit, as is the ability to partially sell down part of a portfolio or a particular transaction. Increased transparency is another key investor benefit, as is the enhanced ability to match assets and liabilities. And finally, depending on the risk appetite, an opportunity for better risk-adjusted returns. Regulators and policymakers are also beneficiaries of a functioning securitisation market, which assist with capital market development and improvement in efficiency and competitiveness for financial institutions. Other benefits for regulators include larger pools of finance and funding and a reduced reliance on the banking sector and a reduction in the systemic risk in the banking sector. It also assists new entrants via the provision of funding sources which are outside the usual bank sector. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a useful framework for understanding some of the essential components for a functioning securitisation market. The first component is the supply of assets, which require a reasonable degree of scale to make any transactions economic. Likewise, the assets need to be of a minimum quality, as well as having ready access to good quality data. An important supply-related issue is the capacity of sellers or originators to provide post-securitisation asset management and servicing. The second component relates to investor demand for securitised assets. This usually means a minimum threshold size for pension funds, insurance companies, banks, DFIs, or retail investors. Related to the investor demand component are the skills and capacity of investors to economically assess credit risk and pricing risk. The third component relates to the need for transaction advisors and arrangers to identify opportunities, as well as the skills and resources to structure transactions. The fourth component deals with issuers and services, support services, and infrastructure, including adequate and reliable servicing systems, intermediaries, rating agencies, credit bureaus, enforcement services, etc. The fifth component are the holistic legal, tax and regulatory framework, including government support that covers tax neutrality for issuers and investors, asset transferability, and rule of law and credit culture and accountability. And the final component, which arguably could be the most important, covers elements such as macroeconomic stability, realistic timelines for transactions, and often requires a champion who may also be an industry disruptor looking to solve a banking sector bottleneck or crisis. Next slide, thank you. In analysing supply and demand considerations relating to the development of securitisation markets, MDBs and DFIs play an important role. On the supply side for financial institutions, an understanding by the board and management was critical, as was the size of the financial institution, the quality of its assets, and the ready access to historic performance data. Other factors, such as the capacity of seller originator pre- and post-issuance, are important. The need for access to funding for diversification, risk management, issuance costs, and comparative funding costs, and a stable regulatory and economic environment are all critical in driving the scale of supply by financial institutions. On the demand side, investor demand is driven by a number of key considerations, including the stage of capital market development, capacity and resources, investor size, comparative returns, crowding out by sovereign issuers, tax-neutral treatment of investments, costs of assessing investments, particularly if they are one-offs or do they represent a predictable pipeline of transactions. On both the supply and demand side, DFIs and MDBs play a critical role in a development role as originators, catalysts, and demonstration deals, enabling capacity building, building market infrastructure, and participating as investors and credit enhancers. DFI roles are made more impactful by taking a longer-term commitment to market development through a series of transactions as opposed to one-off transactional roles. Next slide, please. One of the questions the study sought to understand was why financial institution assets do not dominate assets securitized in Africa. Undoubtedly, regulations limit what can be securitized. The credit quality of financial institution assets is clearly important, as is the ability to access historical performance data. Other considerations, such as awareness and the need for funding, are important. And in many cases, transactions are, again, as I mentioned, driven by a disruptor prepared to champion an issue or asset class that may not be significant on the financial institution's balance sheet. An example of this would be solar pay-as-you-go receivables. As you can see, there's a wide variety of assets securitized in Africa, as indicated on the slide. But understanding why financial institutions have not been a major participant in securitization transactions to date is explored further when we discuss some of the impediments in the slides that follow. Before we get to that, the impediments question, the next two slides present the high-level overviews of market sizing as well as our approach to market classification. This slide attempts to present the largest securitization markets in Africa using our estimate of total issuance outstanding in US dollars as well as total number of issues outstanding. Note that we've used a log scale on the vertical axis just to capture the lowest issuance levels for countries other than South Africa and Egypt. In compiling the slide, it is important to understand the limitations of gathering accurate data as definitions of securitization vary and different metrics and time periods are used across markets. Notwithstanding these challenges, we believe the graphics are broadly accurate and illustrate how the African market is dominated by volume and a number of issues, firstly by South Africa, secondly by Egypt, with issuance dropping off sharply at the next tier of Morocco, WAMU, Nigeria, Ghana, with Kenya and Tanzania making up the bottom of the size rankings. As indicated, a key learning is that greater availability of data and transparency of data will facilitate awareness and assist with overall market development. Next slide, please. In conducting the initial market mapping, we found it helpful to develop a market classification table based on the level of regulatory framework. Classification 1 markets had characteristics of established, robust markets with regular issuance activity, a level of standardization, and demonstrated performance over a number of economic cycles. South Africa and Egypt readily met the requirements for inclusion in this classification category. Classification 2 aimed to include markets that had completed a number of securitization issues, had a basic regulatory framework in place with no major impediments, but had not achieved material inroads with financial institutions, or based on the size of the economy, had not achieved market potential. Markets in this classification include the WAMU region and Morocco and Nigeria. Classification 3 includes markets that appear to have in place a basic regulatory framework, but securitization markets have not yet developed as expected. Although it does include countries with a small number of issues, this includes Kenya, Tanzania, as well as other countries, Ghana, Uganda, Botswana, and Namibia. Classification 4 is aimed at countries that do not appear to have basic regulatory frameworks in place. And there are major impediments, and the capital markets are not sufficiently developed, Ethiopia being an example of a country in this classification. And finally, classification 5, those countries where capital markets are not sufficiently developed. The legal and regulatory structure is inadequate, and there are significant impediments. So these account for the other countries on the continent. Next slide, please. This brings us to the market feedback we received on common impediments and further understanding why financial institutions are not significant participants, particularly in the classification 2 and 3 markets. Most commonly raised is that securitization is complex, cost and implementation is uncertain and requires scale. Lack of understanding of the benefits is another factor, and general lack of understanding of securitization. Most financial institutions believe they can access funds through traditional means, and boards can oppose asset sales, which result in a shrinking balance sheet. For many financial institutions, capital release is no longer seen as a predominant reason to consider securitization. The lack of holistic regulation and laws seen as an obstacle In particular, capital market laws alone are not enough to overcome this issue, and multiple regulators can contribute to a lack of clarity. Asset transferability process often not clear and not economic. Similarly, insolvency laws lack clarity and predictability. Privacy laws can restrict access to information and limit due diligence. Regulation of investors also seen as inhibiting market development. Tax neutrality is a recurring question for investors, and sovereign issuers and their taxation treatment crowd out securitisation investment. Next slide, please. So continuing on with the market feedback and common impediments, lack of historic and accessible data is a commonly cited impediment. Underdeveloped investor capacity to assess investments. Often relatively well-functioning markets, there's a relatively small number of sophisticated investors who have developed skills and expertise over a 10 to 20-year time horizon. This small number of investors becomes much smaller for more complex transactions, and these deals experience a complexity premium, which adds to costs. Warehouse lenders can play an important role as initial funders and subsequently ongoing investors in securitized assets, but regulations can make this restrictive. A lack of accountability and lack of enforcement of securitization laws erode investor confidence. Market infrastructure, intermediaries and settlement systems are lacking, as well as service and backup service capacity. The final issue relates to credit culture among obligors is not embedded and results in unpredictable performance and poor credit outcomes. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I'll just move on to the next slide after this. So we looked at, based on the market mapping outcomes and classification approach, we identified 6 possible focus markets that could be considered as having minimum attributes of basic capital markets framework, potential issuers and local investors, as well as structuring and professional services capacity. This slide considers Kenya, Nigeria and Rwanda as possible focus markets, and it highlights some key illustrative issues for each of these. In Kenya, taxation and VAT lacks clarity and consistency, and there is a lacking of whole of government support. Central bank is not encouraging. Potential issues are deterred by lack of certainty of execution, timing, and pricing and pipeline. Sovereign debt crowds out investor markets, with fund managers hugging the index and little incentive to invest in securitization. No risk-reward premium, high risk-free interest rates deter investors. In Nigeria, macroeconomic consideration, including stability in the banking sector, limits investor confidence. Lack of regulatory supervision and transparency of performance of issues deters investors. Enforcement risk on mortgages and other assets limit investor participation. And again, high risk-free interest rates and volatility deters investors. In Rwanda, the basic law is confused, and the inability to transfer mortgages in a practical and cost-effective manner is a key impediment. Potential issuers do not understand the benefits and do not want to sell assets and decrease their asset base. The regulator has limited capacity and resources to assess issues, and a lack of a pipeline defers investment and resources by potential issuers and investors. Next slide, please. So moving on possible focus markets, the other 3 markets we consider are WAMI, Tanzania and Ghana. For the WAMI markets, common regulation assists to clear the way and provides a valuable model for the other markets. Has room for improvement as regards common taxation treatment to allow wider regional investment. Still a reliance by issuers on banking, funding products. Benefits are not widely understood. Timeline for regulatory approvals is still an issue and deters issuers. Cost of issuance is also a factor. For Tanzania, there is a strong coordinated government support to develop capital markets, but there is a need to extend the understanding of benefits and requirements beyond the regulator. Holistic review of laws needed to support securitization by financial institutions. High rates of interest on sovereign issues limit competitiveness. Finally, for Ghana, for investors, a historic lack of accountability of corporate bond and prior fund manager defaults limit investor confidence, as well as lack of supervision and monitoring, and certainty of court outcomes contribute to investor reluctance. Limits on access to performance data and ability to undertake due diligence. The central bank approval processes are unclear. Lack of clarity on tax issues need to be addressed. No risk-reward premium. Next slide, please. Arising from our work, there are some positive actions we propose to support the development of securitisation markets on the continent. As far as increasing supply of securitisations go, these are to provide support to issuers to demonstrate benefits, build bridges and engagement with policy and decision makers, conduct detailed country holistic assessment of regulatory frameworks and impediments, propose changes to regulation, support initiatives to reduce issuance costs and improve rating access. Regarding actions to increase investor demand, build in-depth capacity for all parties, support investor credit analysis skills development, facilitate MDB co-investment and pilot deals, support access to information for due diligence, require ratings and equalise taxation treatment. Actions to build capacity and coordinated support include feasibility studies for pilot issues, produce standardised core documentation, reinvigorate the African Securitisation Forum and support membership, support practical in-depth training, provision of seed capital for specialist support service companies such as administrators, and actions to support holistic approach to regulatory framework, promote country-specific holistic assessment of regulatory frameworks and impediments, achieve tax neutrality, leverage off regional economic groupings such as WAMU, and mobilise fund industry groups to provide expert input and to lobby policymakers. I know I'm running over, so I'll finish this quickly. The final slide, we wanted to summarise our preliminary views on the 6 focus market mentioned and invite you to provide your views in the Q&A sessions later. Regarding WAMI, regulators are supportive and the regulatory frameworks are largely in place. Existing issuance and emerging capacity need to build on the strengths, especially for smaller financial institutions and investors. Need to target recommendation to target impediments for removal, to build awareness using success stories in other markets, and expand financial institution issuance, improve understanding systems capacity issuance costs. Regarding Kenya, there are existing private issues and government issues and a growing investor base. It's shown past issuer interest and experimentation with new products such as the green protocols. Regulatory framework is generally supportive. Tax neutrality does need a legislative fix. There is also a need to build capacity with investors and fund managers and improve the level of understanding of risk return and diversification as benefits. For Ghana has some issues outstanding, but has a basic framework to build on. In particular, tax neutrality needs to be achieved. A greater focus on enforcement and accountability is essential. There is a large microfinance sector with a long history, and it needs additional capital funding. Perhaps offers potential for higher quality issues, and a focus on affordable housing has the potential. I'll skip to Nigeria, a large economy and market with existing issuers, but limited asset classes outside of mortgages, lack of support to improve impediments. Rwanda has a strong government and policy support to adopt changes to develop capital markets. Local investors present, but there is a shortage of products. Possible early demonstration for a smaller market. Finally, Tanzania has recent issues, preparedness to implement change to develop the market, regulation in place with strong accountability regime, and possible limited asset investor supply, but it's rapidly changing. Thank you very much. Sorry for going over, Leila. I'll hand over to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Well, I'll invite the panelists to come on stage and take their seat. While they do this, I just wanted to check if the audience has any questions. I know it was a lot of content, but hopefully there are a couple of questions that we can address now while the panelists are getting settled. There will be Q&A at the end. There's a question in the back. The slides. Yes. Yeah, so that's a good question. So we're actually in the process of putting together a report, which will actually include a lot of the content that you're actually seeing today. That report, we hope, will be published by July. So we will not be circulating the slides, but the team is actually available the rest of the afternoon and right after the session if you have any immediate questions. But we will make sure that you actually have access to the report once that's published. And the reason why we're not circulating the slides is because the work is still ongoing. So we're just mindful of, we just want to make sure you have the full context and the full picture when you review. Any other questions? Okay. Perfect. Mary.
Thank you, Leila. I think Michael has done a great job to lay the foundation for the discussion that we're going to have. And we are joined by real gurus. I mean, before you are real securitization gurus, so we're diving into a practical conversation. And I'd like to begin just a quick introduction for Oliver Guy, the Chief Executive Officer at my far right, Chief Executive Officer, African Link Capital. And he is indeed a guru in originating, executing, managing securitization transactions, and successfully has closed 12 in the region, raising approximately 380 million euro. And then next to him is Jean-Philippe Athinad. I hope I got that right. Okay. Don't want to massacre your name here, but Deputy Chief Executive Officer of VoD. And he has more than 25 years experience in finance and an expert in derivatives market, portfolio management, and structured finance. And then finally, Clemens, who is the CEO and founder of Signum Capital. And he currently, with his firm, currently oversees about $1 billion in USD in assets under management, and has extensive experience in investment banking, asset management, and will also share with us some insights on his experience as an investor through funds. So I want to just pick your thoughts, gentlemen. If you could just quickly react to the presentation that has just been made. I can see, Clemens, you're ready to go with the mic. So over to you.
I just want to start off because I know my fellow panelists will have something to say about this. So I have three immediate reactions to the presentation, which I think may warrant further looking into. The first one is, you mentioned at the beginning that you're taking a very purist approach to how you define securitization. So I wonder whether that's the best way to cover the entire spectrum of possibilities that are out there, especially in light of the second point I was going to make, which is that the asset classes, if you exclude South Africa, which is probably the only country on the continent that has a developed consumer finance market. So if you look at the assets that are being securitized, I think that very quickly determines whether a purist approach to securitization is appropriate or not. Interesting to hear what my fellow panelists think about that. And then my third comment is that in the, I think in the list of benefits that you have listed as it relates to the securitization product as such, some apply much more in an sub-Saharan or African ex-SA context than others. I think you've highlighted some of those, like the capital relief and so on is not what's really driving a lot of this. And I think some of them are also, some very idiosyncratic ones are probably missing, that investors such as us would be looking for when we invest in securitization structures. But let me hand over to you guys and see what you want to say about this.
Okay. Thank you, Clemens. Maybe before coming to your point, the presentation showed by Michael, reveal one point about the place of financial institutions in assets securitized in Africa, and especially in West Africa, in UEMOA region. there is one perception among financial institutions that securitization is actually um, uh, seen like for only non-performing loans. So we, Africa Link Capital Titrisation, when we get our license from the AMF, so the regulators, in 2015, we have done our first transaction in 2018. So during all this period, we were talking to banks, uh, the importance and the good impact of securitizations for their activities, but for every bank that we were going to see and to present this solution, it was just about securitizing NPLs and all that. So this is one point that we have to, to improve in terms of perception from financial institutions. Also, there is a perception from banks. Banks are ranked based on balance sheet size. When a securitization comes to, to reduce and improve the usage of the equity. So I think once banks will and financial institutions will, try to perform in terms of equity returns, this could enhance the participation of banks in financial institutions in the development of securitizations and also capital market. One other point is the importance of disruptors that Michael mentions in his presentation, because we all know, I don't know if you all know, we all know that securitization is the good instrument to raise funds, to improve capital ratios and all that, but we still need to build awareness for the seller so that they can know that this instrument securitization exists and can make good impact on their activities. So this awareness building will be and is one of our major struggle when we discuss with companies that we are on which we are focused to execute transactions, and we are still trying to educate people, to educate corporate, to also educate government states, so that they can have a look on this solution, because as we know, in all other developed markets, like in Europe, like in US, securitization played a very key role in the economic and even social development. So once we'll get there, I think financial institutions, finance, and maybe like housing finance in our zone, which has a very huge needs, could achieve some solution by having recourse to securitization. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Olivier. Going back to the point that Clemens was talking about, is about why do the study exclude South Africa? I think it should be better to include it, because this is where we have to go, when you compare to other regions in Africa, because they were most developed market. And the other thing is also related to the fact that the scope of the type of securitization that can be that are included in the study are excluding synthetic securitization. And we have some synthetic securitization on the continent that will be done by FSD, for example. So now it should be a good idea to include that in the study to see how, because when you develop in a market, you cannot define how this market will develop. People will develop a market be based on their needs. So it's better to have a wide view on this. And two other things regarding this study. As Olivier is saying, we all have the same perception when talking to banks. Two things. They want securitization as a liquidity instrument. So when you come to them that it will take a few months to get the transaction done, they are not interested anymore because it's too long compared to other sources. And also, every bank I'm talking to, they will ask you at some moment, can I get some NPL in the portfolio? They will always ask you that. But you cannot build a market on NPLs because, this is very specialized portion of securitization. So people are seeing securitization as a way of kind of dumping assets, but not as a strategic tool. And that's what we're working on together. So people can see securitization as a strategic tool instead of a way to dump assets.
Thanks. Really rich feedback and insights. Thank you very much. I think we've taken note of that, even as we continue with the work we're doing. And we hope to get more comments, more input into what has been shared by Michael. Please feel free to reach out to us on this session or even after. So now just moving further away from that presentation and getting into some practical meat in terms of securitizations that you have all been involved in, whether as arrangers or as investors. It would be really interesting to hear some of your own practical insights. So just bringing your experience here to the panel, really, and sharing it with the room. If you could just elaborate on some of the key success factors that have made it possible for some of the investments you've made or issuances that you've been able to bring to market. I think it's quite telling for us to be having this event here in the Waimo region because I think there've been front-runner transactions in this region, so that's really quite something. So perhaps we can start with you, Olivier. Your 12 transactions, successful transactions, I think you can pull out several and share with us some of those insights. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mary. I will start with the PPT transaction, PPT deal. So PPT is for Programme Électricité pour tous, so electricity for all. This is a government program which aims to provide electricity to all the households in Côte d'Ivoire, especially in rural areas. So what the government has noticed is that in villages, people did not have access to electricity. Why? Because the cost to acquire the meters and all this kit was very high for them. So they set up this PPT program to allow these households to access to the electricity. The principle is for them to pay a minimum amount, like 1,000 CFA francs, and repay the remaining 150,000 over a 5 to 10 years period. So this program started in 2014, and by 2018, the demand from households increased. So also the needs for finance increased. And we were helping the government in monitoring the performance of the program. And so we suggested with, the collaboration of some GFIs like IFC to use securitization as a tools to raise funds. Why? Because the offers from banks was not so adapted to the needs, particularly in terms of maturity of the transaction. Because knowing that households were repaying over 10 years period and sometimes more than 10 years, we were in needs of long-term, very long-term maturity finance. So by structuring these transactions, we have been able to raise funds in 3 tranches, one for 7 years, the second one a 10-year tranches, and a 15-year tranche. This permit to finance the whole needs in terms of maturity. Also, this transaction have been able to provide electricity to rural areas, was labeled as social bonds by Moody's. So this was the first social bonds issued on our capital market, and also, the first transaction with 3 tranches when we achieved it in 2023. So securitizations allow people, to have finance from different sources of finance, because this issuance was done with DFIs like IFC, like EIF, like also Signum Capital, which invested in the transaction. Also, local banks invested in the transaction. Also, people like you and me invest in the transaction. So, securitization is tools to gather different sources of fundings to provide fundings to finance projects and all kind of projects. Also, maybe I can talk about the NCA Bank transaction that we have done in 2020. It was a period where there were a kind of liquidity issue on the market, and maybe especially for this bank. So this transaction, we raised 40 billion on the capital market. Was in 2020, just before the COVID-19 crisis, and it was the first transaction for a banks in this in our zone. So securitizations provide liquidity and allow also NCA Bank to manage their capital ratio, the capital bank ratio. So this is, I think, the framework for securitization is good so far, and we just need to meet the needs and the issue that some key player met, so that we can provide them these solutions to improve the activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those insights. I think I'll just invite Jean-Philippe to share briefly on one other transaction that you've been involved in.
Yes, thank you, Barry. Another point relating to the study, just to finish on that, is about tax neutrality, which is very important for securitization transaction, because for investors, you want to know how much cash we get in, at the end of the transactions. Regarding the deals that we have done, I can talk about 2 things. The first thing is to understand the needs of the originator or the seller. So we're taking some time to discuss with the originator to see what you really need. In some cases, we would tell the originator that, okay, to fix your problem, securitization is not your solution. We're very upfront about that, because I don't want to give them a tool that will not be helpful to them. So regarding that, on a practical basis, we've done 2 deals with BII, a West African Development Bank. And the first deal, the objectives of BII were 2 things. They want to raise some liquidity, and the second thing, they want also to have some capital savings. So based on these 2 objectives, we set up a transaction which was pretty big at the time, 150 billion, when we raised some liquidity for them, and we tranched the transaction also. So they were also able to have some capital savings. So that was the first thing. So that was the first transaction to get them, used to that kind of tools. Last year, 2024, when we came back for the second tranche of this program, the needs, the objective of BYD were different. At that time, they don't need liquidity anymore. They have done an issue, so they don't need liquidity, but they also want some capital saving at that time. So we structured the transaction differently this time. And the third objective was to protect their BBB rating with this transaction. So if you want, this objective of having some liquidity saving, we have to structure the transaction in such a way that they don't raise as much liquidity, but they were able to transfer risk to outside investors. So in that transaction, the junior tranche was retained by BOD, but they retained also the senior tranche, the whole senior tranche, and also the mezzanine was sent was sold to investor. That way, they were able to have some capital saving, and Signum was part of those investors. And also, that would that way that would give them some caution for the BBB rating. The second thing that we check when we do our deals is to be mindful of investor needs. Most of investors are regional, so we don't want to bring too much change in the market. We do it, on a very step-by-step basis. So in the first transaction, we just do two tranche based on risk transaction, and in the second one, we try to have a transaction that is more aligned to international standards with 3 tranches, which will be the senior, the mezzanine, and the junior. We didn't do it in the first one. We can do it, but we prefer to do just 2 tranches just to get the market used to those new structures. So roughly that's about what I can say about it. Clemens?
Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about transactions because we invest in all of these and they're all great deals, but maybe just to give you a sense of a framework that we apply when we look at structuring or investing in a securitization. So number one, obviously, tax neutrality or tax efficiency is a starting condition almost. Secondly, it was mentioned that enforcement of security or asset ownership is critical. Some regulatory regimes are pretty clear about it, others are less so. But the implementation and the actual enforcement action in most places is untested and therefore not something one can 100% rely on. And that means, if you think about a securitization where assets are being handed over to an originator, we look very carefully at at a servicer or from an originator. So we look at all the participants in the securitization, and irrespective of, at least in many instances, irrespective of whether it's a true sale or not, we take a very careful look at where the assets come from and whether they're truly independent, which in most instances they're not. And then lastly, one of the things that securitizations are very sort of what they sometimes lead to, and you mentioned banks trying to get rid of their NPLs. The asset selection is a very critical component. In some instances, or in many instances, there is a form of asset stripping happening where either bad assets are being hived off or the residual business is being left with bad assets because all the good assets go into the securitization vehicle. And since there are never really truly true sale transactions where you can have complete linkage, you break the link completely between the securitization vehicle and the originator, we always need to look at whether the way assets are selected, the originator continues to operate, which for most transactions is essential. Very technical to some degree, but let me stop here.
Thanks. Thank you all. I think in the interest of time, we'll stop there, really. But this is a discussion that can go on and on. I think we're really interested in just getting any of your reactions or questions, comments, maybe even your own reactions to the presentation that was made earlier. And yeah, so any questions, comments are welcome.
Thank you so much. Maybe if you don't mind, I'll ask my question in French. So, do we have some translator around, or should I ask in English? Okay, well, I'll try asking it in English then. Okay. I'm not really fluent in English, so that's why
I think you can feel free to speak in French. The
Okay, great. So, yeah, it's quite interesting to listen from these securitization actors in the YMU region and in Africa region. But my question I don't see the name clearly, Olivier, what do you think is the potential, what do you think is the value of the potential securitization markets in the YMU? I'm not talking here about bonds, government bonds, but I'm talking about the bank loans to the private sector in the YMU. What do you think you see as an opportunity, the value of the securitization opportunity in that market, and for which demand? Because it's not only about the origination of those securitization, but also there should be a demand. So what's the potential of the offer in terms of securitization and the demand? And maybe to the gentleman from Signum Capital, I know you are investing a lot in frontier and emerging markets. The same question to Olivier, how do you see the overall value of potential securitization in sub-Saharan Africa? Thanks.
I will start. Thank you. In terms of potential of securitization in West Africa region and especially in WEMU region, I think, I don't know if I'm able to, assess, to say some figures, but the potential is huge. The regulatory framework have been set up in 2010, and 15 years today after, we have not done really anything so far, because at the beginning the securitization framework have been set up to finance financial institutions and housing, and I think so far we are very far from the objectives. Even to finance government infrastructures in terms of roads, in terms of toll bridge, and all these opportunities to finance the economy. So the potential is extremely huge so far, and our role today is to build awareness toward government, toward corporate, toward banks, so that they can have a look on the securitization, what have been done in developed market, in Europe, even in Asia, in US, so that they can say, okay, this securitization can be a solution. Maybe let's try it, and once we start working with them, I think the transaction that we have done for the PPT is a good one, because today our authorities are start listening to us in terms of using securitization to finance all the project. We have done several transactions in power sectors, especially in electricity sectors, but we are still trying to finance in all the sectors that I've talked about, like infrastructures and housing, where the needs are very huge. So for the investor perspective, I will let Clemens at this point.
Yeah, I can cover this very quickly. The reason why we like securitizations is because, as intended, these structures isolate certain risks that we can identify and quantify more granularly. And also, and that's equally important, it imposes a certain discipline on the financing package overall. Yeah, it removes a lot of noise and the risk of interference. and I think that is overall beneficial for capital markets, broadly speaking, but also for the issuance specifically.
Yeah, also just to add something here about say the size of the market. If you take the US market, I think compared to GDP, securitization in total volume is about close to 100% or something like that. But if you compare that to WMO regions, it's close to 0.1%. So, you know, we have a very huge way to go to get, we not need to go to the US market penetration size, but there is a huge, potential over there. Maybe we can compare that to South Africa. I don't have the numbers, but just to tell you, also as Olivier is saying, we're just doing a few types of securitization here now in the market. We can expand it a lot with different type of receivables, different type of cash flows, and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and for the very insightful discussions. My first question will be for you, Mr. Etna, and also maybe Mr. Frank. It's quite related to what you mentioned in the presentation, that sometimes there is a need for a disruptor to really scale up the development of the market. And Mr. Etna, I understand that you are mostly securitizing assets from BII, the West African Development Bank. I would like to know if that's an advantage, having this asset from a regional DFI, and it's related to Michael, if you think that the disruptor, the one to actually lead development of the market, should be a regional development financial institution, or is it better to have an asset from commercial banks? So that will be my question for both of you. And maybe a second one, very quickly. Securitization is very often associated with the crisis in 2008 in the United States. And you mentioned that there is a need to have regulatory frameworks to also scale up the development of the market. Do you think that there are some specific safeguards which should be put in place to avoid the adverse effect that we observed in 2008 in the United States? Thank you.
Sorry. Regarding the fact that we have done securitization for BII, no, it's not the only securitization that we've done. We've done other securitization for other sellers as well. So the deal that we've done with BII is just an example I'm showing here. And we've done some securitization with some states and with some commercial bank. We work with Olivier on a deal on that issue, on that front. Regarding the GFC, the crisis in 2008, first I just want to remind that the regulatory framework here was established in 2010, which is 2 years after the GFC. So people have learned some lesson from there, so we can have some protection. Nothing is perfect, we can say that. So there are some improvements that need to be made. But I think the regulatory framework is solid. It's perfectible, but it's solid. And I don't see at this moment a huge risk as what happened in 2008. Olivier, maybe you can add something.
Yes, thank you, Jean-Philippe. So regarding the 2008 crisis, actually, from my perspective, the regulatory framework in WMU took into account some lesson from the crisis. When, for example, in Europe, after this crisis, they include the STS securitizations, labelization. I think there's there's specificities are already included in our framework. So yes, the regulatory framework somehow protects investors from what happened globally during this crisis. Also, for the needs of maybe disruptors, I will say something quickly. Once we try to, we were talking to corporate and banks to do our first transaction. We met almost all the banks in the place, and one day we discussed with a microfinance institutions, Cofina, with Jean-Luc Conan, and maybe after like 15 minutes of presentation, he just said, okay, let's try this new mechanism so that you can see what it can do. And we were like, okay, is it true what we are listening to? And effectively, just after that, we were able to launch our first microfinance loans securitizations, and it was also a multi-seller transaction because the microfinance from Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal were included in the transaction. So yes, we need these kind of disruptors that can say, okay, let's try there's new means of finance. And after that, even banks started contacting us to say, okay, can you tell us more about what we have done with Cofina so that we can better understand what's happened and how this securitization can help us?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I think, I really think that the insights that have been shared here really just demonstrate that these are really the disruptors who have helped move the market in various ways, as they've shared in the roles that they've played, both as arrangers and investors. So I think as we just come to the close, and I'll hand it back to Leila, I just want to share just some quick points that I hear coming out of the room, and I trust that they resonate. So just this focus on the potential for securitizations is huge, and we're talking about the role of securitization in promoting capital markets development in Africa. That's the theme of today's session. So really just pointing to that development potential. The benefits have been shared, the need for awareness raising amongst potential issuers and even investors, questions around the kind of assets being securitized, concerns around real true sale, considerations, understanding both originator and investor needs, and the important role that securitizations play in de-risking. Like there's an element of de-risking there in terms of the kind of structure that is developed from securitization transactions after the asset transfers. Then I think we've heard from the front runners, because I think those speaking here are front runners in various ways. We've heard about some of the first transactions in this region, and also Clemens talking about a front runner role that the investor, as an investor, they have taken, and some of their own considerations. Finally, I think what I take away is the potential, just going back to my earlier point, that there is potential to expand the scope of the types of securitization transactions that we are seeing and the types of receivables that can be securitized. So I think I'll end it there. And thank you once again, Michael, for igniting the discussion with your presentation. Thank you for your insights, panelists. So over to you, Leila. Thank you very much. Let's give them a hand of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much again to all the presenters and panelists today. Thank you to the audience. We really appreciate the turnout and all the questions. I'm sure you'll have many follow-ups for us, and so some of us will stay behind to try to answer what we can. If not, we're also happy to receive emails so we can provide some contact details. So we're very grateful for the insight and all the questions. And as mentioned earlier, again, this is just a teaser presentation, but a more comprehensive report will follow, and we'll make sure that this is widely available and published. Thank you again.